All right, well, why don't we get started? This is the June Tech Lancaster. Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone here is on the Slack already, but for the people on the stream, you can go to the techlancaster.com website and yes, it is live. And hopefully find an email to requester, leave a YouTube comment requesting access, and we'll try to sort that out. And today, Jonathan is speaking, so I will turn it over to him.
All right, I'm gonna talk primarily to the room, people I see. So I'll try to stay in the camera frame. Anyway, so this presentation, first I'm taking it sitting down because I need to be on my laptop for it, and there's no stand, so it's a little weird. But yeah, it's primarily kind of advancements and changes over the past couple years of web development that sort of makes the front end and call it the back end closer together, easier to work, kind of ties them up. Moving forward, sort of some pain points with kind of current development. GraphQL is sort of great in a lot of ways, but it's also pretty frustrating for anyone who's worked with it. Like, it definitely adds significant overhead to projects. You kind of have like a whole nother schema to think about in addition to your database schema or your Redis schema or your document store or whatever. However you're storing stuff in your hard storage, you also then have to sort of translate that to a graph, and that's always another frustrating layer. I find REST is simpler, but it's not typed by default. Clients vary a lot. I mean, you can use fetch, but then that's pretty rough, and then there's just not as many standardized ways to access it, and obviousif just losing your types. If you're going through a lot of work, if you're .NET or TypeScript or something with types in the back end, it kind of sucks to just lose them all at that barrier. Also, logic is duplicated in a lot of cases. So I mean, like, users want users want instant feedback, but then you also want to provide first-time visitors a pre-rendered page. So that often leads to just kind of having similar or hopefully the same logic on both back end and front end, and just leads to usually drift in a lot of cases. End-to-end testing can be tough currently. Like, I don't think I've ever worked anywhere where end-to-end testing actually worked all that great. We just kind of gave up on it after a while. You just want to isolate the parts of the system, but then you sort of you lose that stuff at the interfaces. And a lot of your system is the interface between different services, or primarily in a lot of e-commerce applications. Your big monolithic back end and your big front end. There's a ton of interfaces between the two, so it's nice to test them together. And it just requires a context switch. Like, I mean, most front ends are probably in TypeScript on the web, or maybe JavaScript if you're a little behind the times. Yeah, you just you jump from JavaScript or TypeScript to C#, Ruby, Python, Java, whatever, what have you. It's just kind of a completely different context. So that is sort of the pain points. And luckily for kind of people developing applications today, there's a lot of people trying to solve this problem. So if you're kind of in the Ruby on Rails world, there's Hotwire, which kind of aims to minimize the talk back and forth and just make that easier. There's LiveView if you're kind of into Phoenix. Blazor and .NET looks pretty sweet. There's a couple different options there. And on the JavaScript side, there's Next.js has been around for a while, and Remix is kind of the new kid on the block, but both solve similar problems. And I'm going to kind of go point by point, just do a couple different things here, sort of diving in what's some cool stuff you can do with these technologies. So the first one is just sharing logic. So what do we mean by that? If you're coming from Google or wherever, you kind of want a statically rendered HTML page. You don't want to sit there and watch like a spinner. Like purely client-side logic kind of sucks in a lot of cases. Like, you sort of want that server-side rendered experience, but when you're sort of interacting with the UI, users also want kind of like, if they're in Excel or something that does calculations, as you're typing, you kind of want the UI to give you instant feedback. So with that, let me just spin up a Next.js project. Let me know if these code examples aren't that important right now. So let's see. Okay. me just log in because you have to be logged in this app to do anything. Okay, so what do I mean by sharing logic on the front and back end? I'm going to kind of give a concrete example here. So all these properties of a page, underneath the hood, they're actually kind of like calculations. Think like Excel formulas where you can reference other properties and divide or multiply or do whatever sort of sum them, whatever you may have you. For an ideal experience, like I want that logic on the back end, so like it's pre-rendered, ready to go, HTML. My browser doesn't have to calculate that on the fly. But in the case of me going in and editing them, say, like for whatever reason, I want to divide this. If you look down here, maybe I'll blow this up a little bit. But
is what you're doing right now a user?
yeah, so I'm logged in as just like an admin user, and on my local host, just a kind of a stub, like it's just a test database, so it's just kind of junk data I made up. But as you can see, kind of I'm doing stuff, and that is all the same exact logic on the front end and the back end, and I can kind of dive in a little bit to that. So we essentially, I'll get into sort of some techniques that can help you. It's not just Next.js and TypeScript. There's actually some ways kind of to fund it. Like for anybody who's an MVC, you think of models. It's a different way of kind of structuring your model. So in this case, we're taking the text that is the calculation and then all of our properties, and it's kind of a pure function in that sense, in that it allows us to calculate it without having to instantiate a model and kind of do all that overhead. You just pass it the data and then spit you back the value that you want. So that is kind of a good example of sharing logic and why you might want to do it. It's kind of to get the best of both worlds. Let's go back into play. Some techniques could kind of help share logic. Pure functions operating on data, they make it much easier to share. I'll kind of get into the details of why that is. And by data, I basically mean anything that fits into JSON. Basically no like functions, no classes, just arrays, objects, simple values if you're in the JavaScript, TypeScript world. So why pure functions versus classes? One example is instantiation. So when you send that JSON over the wire, if you're kind of doing that, you have to then instantiate it and then pass that instantiated object, and it just kind of is awkward in a in a functional like React UI basis. The other big one is tree shaking. As soon as you use the keyword this, due to inheritance, it becomes basically impossible for a tree shaker to guarantee that that method in your class is not used. So any reference to that class, it has to bring the whole class. So with a pure function, literally granularly at the method level, if you have a module with 17 different functions versus a class with 17 methods, with pure functions, it can get super granular. It's very easy to statically figure out what is used and what's not. And this actually applies for the client side. Obviously, important, you want to minimize kind of the code you're shipping to the client, but actually, like I've been experimenting with Google Cloud Run, where you actually package all your stuff up into a Docker container, and it spins it up on the fly. It's kind of like a serverless thing, and that makes your server-side bundles even important too. So again, that same logic applies that the bundler, whether it be Webpack or SWC or a Rust-based, more modern-based bundler, they still all kind of use the same dead code analysis. So it minimizes your bundle front end and back end. It makes if you're auto scaling your instances up, it makes them that much faster to spin off if there's less code for the node to interpret and get warm. Another big change, I think, kind of with some of these next generation frameworks is unified client-side and server-side routing. So server-side rendering is kind of a great experience if you're coming from the just from Google, or you're a fresh visitor. Client-side routing, though, allows for a lot of nifty transitions, some cute prefetching that's a little harder to do with standard web stuff. Also, a big advantage of client-side routing is as you navigate, you don't have to reparse your CSS in JavaScript, versus with traditional stuff, it kind of has to do a fair amount of work to build up that CSS object model. So, client-side really sucks. Like, how many of you hate when you go to a site, just, a bunch of spinning stuff, or even worse, it's like 6 different spinners, and they all sort of come in at different times. Like, that's kind of what happens with client-side routing, because you hit it and this empty thing, the browser boots everything up, checks the URL, then fetches the data. It actually creates like a pretty nasty waterfall to kind of actually get something on the screen. But server-side routing obviously has its flaws too. You have to, like I said, reevaluate scripts, reparse styles. There are some browser standard prefetching, but like it's not supported at all in Safari, so you lose all of iOS for that, and there's just some limits on what you kind of can prefetch. You also have to fetch the full HTML representation, which is obviously a little heavier than just kind of the bare data. And it just limits you, although there are some cool page transition APIs coming out, they're sort of leading edge right now, so this sort of allows you to, in the current time right now, do fancy transitions and stuff like that if you like. Just some cool stuff. Let me see here. I'm gonna jump over to my browser. This is just a production version, mostly just kind of test data, but with a real domain on the live web. And so as you can see, I hit that. It's server-side rendered. Actually, let me even go in here. I'm gonna do a hard refresh, and you'll see it's just document 3 or 4s in this case because we already have it warm in our cache, but it's just regular old HTML. But as we kind of navigate around, you'll see no more documents are actually requested. We're just, Next.js kind of seamlessly says, all right, we're booted up, like we're going to just fetch the JavaScript or the JSON for you. So that's neat. So it kind of just allows you to do like, just really seamless, like almost instantaneous, even though there is data fetching in the background. It really, because JavaScript, CSS is booted up, so literally as quick as we can get that data back, it renders nearly instantly. JavaScript's already hot. Like V8 does a really good job at jitting stuff once it's been run through it a handful of times. So let's see. Another cool thing. So this is another thing I'd say I've been experimenting with is end-to-end testing, but you get code coverage on the front end and the back end. So let me just run through an example of what that looks like. So let me shut down my server here, and let me actually just change my test argument real quick. All right, so I'm running a test. This is actually wiping out my database, doing a production compilation, so it's doing minification and all that kind of stuff, reseeding the database with fresh, clean data, so it's in a clean state, and then spinning up a real browser and actually hitting stuff and doing all that kind of stuff. And I just I put it on the headed mode, so it's actually like logging in, like creating a session, all that kind of stuff. And as you can see, like the longest part was by the compilation, kind of parallel test running for end-to-end testing has come a long way with stuff like Playwright. So it actually ran like 12 tests in about 20 seconds. So with that said, let's see, coverage. So let me see here. Trying to find a good example. Okay, here's the one. So let me zoom this in a little bit. All right, so as if you're familiar with Next.js or not, I'm not sure, but this piece of code here actually only runs on the server. And this one down here is actually a component, can run server side and client side, but with not quite out of the box, but I would say with like a couple hours of work, I kind of stitched together, and there's some various pull requests and ways to build this into Playwright, but to essentially stitch together that code coverage. So this is the merged code coverage of our server side and our client side running, and so you kind of get it. So not only are you sort of testing the full thing, like your front end, the interface between the front end and the back end, and then any logic, whether it be back end, front end, and then also any database access. We're kind of testing that all together here, but it's in a neatly kind of bundled up package, and has all the amenities like code coverage and stuff that you're used to with regular unit testing.
And Playwright is what you're using, that's the test automation?
Yep, yeah, this is all based on Playwright.
Okay.
Yep.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, it's by Microsoft. It's actually pretty sweet. It has obviously JavaScript was the first one, but then C#.NET was pretty quick to follow, and now they have major clients for kind of all the languages, and it's kind of like Selenium and Puppeteer, they sort of looked at everything that was wrong or pain points there, and starting from a clean slate, got to building a really kind of solid end-to-end testing system. So it's built with parallelization in mind. What do I mean by that? So when you start up like locally on my machine, it actually looks how many cores there are, and will run like all my cores -2 or -3 or whatever. But then you can also do shard. So you can say, I want to run at least 3 machines, and the only thing you have to pass them is you're 1 of 3, 2 of 3, and 3 of 3, and it will automatically figure out which subset of tests and kind of take care of all the merging of coverage and all that kind of stuff. So it actually has per machine parallelization, but then also kind of sharding across instances, which is pretty wild. I've never used that personally, but like the place I'm working now, our engineers are working on, they said it seems to be working pretty nicely, like our platform. Also, another kind of advancement with Playwright is they can detect your OS and CPU architecture and just install a compatible browser that can speak to all the Playwright stuff, so you don't have to go through this big dance or setting up a Docker container to get everything to work. It just kind of works right out of the box. And also, APIs do wait on elements. Kind of by default, the default way to find stuff is asynchronous, and we'll wait for it to, one, be in the DOM, be visible, and whatever event handlers to attach and actually be ready to click. So you kind of get way less misfires. If you're used to Selenium, it's kind of hell writing a test. You sort of end up writing stuff super defensively, and it can be pretty frustrating. Simplified deploys is kind of another cool one with sort of Next.js Remix, any of these sort of more unified things. What I mean by that basically is that because it's a unified thing kind of serving the API endpoints, and is also serving your bundled CSS and JavaScript and all that kind of stuff. When you deploy to new instances, as soon as the load balancer switches over to them, everybody's getting the new APIs and the new front end bundles and stuff all at once. So there's a lot less kind of orchestration to deploying new APIs and features and that kind of stuff. Another cool advancement I think kind of in this space is HTTP calls with kind of the ergonomics. So everything we've seen so far uses Next get server-side props. So that's kind of, we fetch all the data on the server, we pre-render HTML, and then there's some kind of magic that if you hit that route navigating on the front end, it just runs get server-side props and returns the JSON. It doesn't do that. But there's often times where you do want to fetch, or in a lot of cases, mutate data. So like I want to update, I want to make changes, so I want to run queries for my front-end code. And that's usually where REST or GraphQL come in. But there's actually, Blitz.js is one that's kind of a little more compiler level. So it does some magic in either Babel, Webpack, or SWC to kind of compile stuff I'm going to show you. Or there's, the name escapes me. If I think of it, I'll remember it. But there's another solution that's more configuration based, but allows you to, I'll kind of jump in here and show what I mean by this exactly. So let's jump into code. Let's see here. Okay, so the way I've found myself updating stuff too, by the way, is I think of my code for, so these are like those little properties that you saw on the right-hand side. Let's see, like, where is it at? That page is dead. Anyway, there's properties on the right-hand side, just like a key value sort of thing, and they can be calculated as well. But the model for that, like there's calculate, there's group, so like the properties are stored just in one table, but then we actually like show them to the user in groups and that kind of stuff. We don't want to store that. We don't want to tie ourselves to our database abstraction. So I think of kind of models, mutations, how do I update or change the data in the actual underlying data store. Mutations are also generally responsible for updating or clearing caches. And then queries, just item code, you can call as many times as you want and get the same results. So let's see if we can find, I think this is a good one. So essentially, this is kind of Blitz.js conventions, but this is just a schema, so basically input validation. So when these properties come in, they're being validated, so people can just put like malicious user IDs or whatever, and make somebody else the owner of something, that kind of thing. Authorize, make sure that you're an authorized user, and then here's the one that actually gets like your input data and any context surrounding it. And then I'm using an ORM called Prisma. That's it's pretty nifty. It's kind of like a Link from the C# world, if you ever use that or something. But it's really nice, sort of type safe in and out of the database. So you get all that niftiness. Anyway, so this is the function, but how do we actually call this? So let me see. So this is my front-end component. This is the property form. So like, let me see. This should I spun my local server back up. Let me relog back in because it probably cleared my session. Just to give you some context of where I'm at here. So that's this component right here. So when I click this update button, it's actually calling this, and this update property is actually the export here. And that is, there's just a convention that if you import from these mutation folders, the default export, Blitz is actually compiling that to a React query-friendly implementation. So what that means is, I get this here, and I just literally calling it like a function for my front end. Everything's type safe, type checked. If I wanted to, you could use like the React query like error, and then like that'll kind of be a error, that sort of stuff. Actually, you can see it up here. So you can get error, you can get whether it is loading, that sort of stuff. In a much more ergonomic way. Under the hood, I guess that's what I want to show next. So what is actually going on here? Yeah, so it actually, at compilation time, it's creating a update property route in the back end, and then inserting that call into the front end code, and dynamically creating that route on the back end. And everything's kind of like type safe. Like I said, error handling is sort of there. Is loading state is all handled in a kind of smooth, ergonomic way. I'd say that's another big, to me, innovation in the front end space that I think is going to be pretty sweet going forward. Dang, I really wish I could think of the other, like I said, this is all Blitz.js, but there's another, TRPC, I think it is. Let me double check that. Yeah, so this is more, TRPC is more of a configuration base, so there's no compile step, but then you have to register all your stuff, essentially, and it doesn't rely on conventions as much. So just a kind of different way of tackling the same idea. But let's see. Like I said, I'm kind of just a bunch of loose ideas floating around my head. So I'm just kind of freewheeling it. But some stuff I love about this. So as I said a little bit earlier, but I can't really describe how much I like this. No defining schemas again. Like I already thought a lot about my database schema or my document if I'm using a document store or something like that. But I don't want to have to redo that again in GraphQL. All the existing IDE stuff, so like I don't know if you noticed, but like as I was in there, like if I want to jump to this quote API definition, like my F12 works, if I want to see like where it's used, I can, go to references and see, oh, it's only used right here. So you can kind of get all your IDE goodies, even though it's an API call. You can kind of use all that sweet stuff. You don't get that, you're not missing that type gap. So like, let me see if I can tease that out here. So, copy form. If I just put some, let me see here. Probably isn't gonna work like I want it to. Let me see here.
If you put like a boolean.
That's a good idea. Let me try. This probably won't work. Yeah, it's not gonna work now. It's gonna make a fool of me. But anyway, it should put a red squiggly underneath there and yell at me for not being able to do that. But not sure why. I think I might actually know. There we go. Yeah, so it will type check it all through. Yeah, so I think it was getting the item ID from that spread there, and that's why I was happy. This is all just kind of a toy app I've been toying with, so it's not super up to snuff. But yeah, so you get all the type checking and all that kind of stuff. And as I said before, it kind of ensures API changes are always the same as callers. So you don't kind of get that, all of a sudden you're getting a bunch of front-end sentry errors because, the API schema changed or something. And that is all I have. It's just kind of a quick overview. A little short or long, I guess, depending how you look at it. But like I said, it wasn't super well polished. These are just all sort of stuff I'd like to polish up into a more coherent talk, which is kind of stuff I think is neat in the front end, or what I like to call the first layer of the back end. Before you get to the database or any like real services. So, any questions? Anybody have anything they want to add? Anything like that?
Yeah, I wrote it down, honestly. So like, obviously things like Remix and Next are switching to like a monorepo situation. But like, how do you then handle like multiple different teams? Kind of, does it do away with multiple different teams of like the back end, front end, divide?
No, I think that's actually, I think a lot of tooling, so I think it would depend on what you're working in, but I'd say like in Rails, there's engines, which are kind of like almost separate Rails projects, but they're if you have kind of completely separate domains, instead of spinning up a whole new service, you keep it in one repo, and you start a new engine, which is basically a whole new Rails project, but within the same repo. .NET Core has areas as a concept, as a kind of a first-class concept that allows you to split out different business areas of concerns. I don't know that area as well. And specifically within JavaScript, packages. So there's pretty good support within Next.js to split out into different packages if you want a super hard boundary. I also just tend to think your conventions would hopefully give you some boundaries. Like if you're working on items or properties or something like that, or if you're working on back-end user stuff, like your commits hopefully aren't going to clash too much. I mean, I know like I would say the size of a company that fits into a mono repo is getting bigger and bigger. I mean, Shopify obviously has some services, but like as far as I understand to this day, still has most of their code in one giant mono repo. GitHub is very similar. GitLab is very similar. Kind of a lot of the ceiling for a mono repo is growing, and I think tooling like this takes that even farther. Not even just the ceiling for a mono repo, but kind of what one engineer can build a quality thing. The amount of time and energy it takes to build higher quality stuff that kind of is type safe, performant, takes data prefetching, kind of browser best practices, all that stuff. The effort level is it's still tough. Like it's still a pain in the ass. I feel like to build a performant web application is really easy to make it do shit, but I think the tools are getting better, and this is definitely a huge step in that direction.
Do you think this would encourage then teams too to be like more like domain and feature specific as opposed to like function of the individuals on the team?
Yeah, I mean that would be that's what I hope. I feel like you lead to faster development iteration, and it just it helps a lot. Whether like in this case I'm using Prisma ORM, but even if you're just issuing raw selects or if you're reaching out to Elastic or whatever, I feel like it helps a lot for the engineers working with that to see what that fetch call looks like, and hopefully, like in the case of Prisma or something like Link, like you're getting types back too, so you kind of have a better understanding of the data model and the types coming out of it, and those types pass through to you on the front end, so you're kind of as type safe as you can be from the database the whole way through to the front end.
The front end meetup host, original organizer, Eric, is always talking about like the front of the front end and the back end. Sorry, front of the front end and the back of the front end being like.
Oh yeah,
there's, like,
that's good. That's a good thing.
versus-
Yeah, I would consider the back of the front end is what most, like a lot of people think is back end, and then the back end is actually like Postgres,
Yeah.
or Redis,
Yeah.
or like a heavy duty service, not like what a lot of companies think of as services, but like I work at New Relic, like our data ingest service. Like I mean, there's like trillion, like just ungodly amounts of data coming into that thing, and it's uses Kafka and all this fancy stuff. But that's a good place for like a back end service that is strictly API.
Right.
A lot of places I feel like get into service soup, where like really the services, but it should probably just be a folder in your project. And
Mhm.
like you can have different deploy targets. Like if it's a job runner or something like that, like it can deploy to its own cluster. But I feel like having it in the same code base and
Yeah.
having those types flow through is really super helpful.
That makes sense. I think the reason that he brings that like front end up is because a lot of people that show up to front end they see things like this, like encroaching on like the front end domain. Not so much in a like get off my lawn thing, but like oh god, what am I gonna have to learn like to be able to continue doing what I do in this space that's like what used to be front end development of like I've got this template that some back end engineer made for me, and I'm just going to style it and make it semantic, make it accessible. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's
interface type,
Yeah.
usability stuff.
yeah, and I feel like there's always going to be a bundling and unbundling. You know, there's going to be a bundling where like one person can do more.
Right.
But then, like, I mean, as an org grows, there is going to be unbundling where, like, you're going to have a guy who knows everything about accessibility. It's going to
Mhm.
cross-cut across
Yeah.
all that. You're going to have a guy who's maybe like a database expert, and you know, when your Postgres, you know, is taking seconds to spit data out, like he's going to be the one that knows like whatever weird internal Postgres stuff you need to change your query to make it go faster. Like, I think you always have domain expertise, and I feel like the industry's kind of cyclical and where like it, you know. I don't think that's true. It seems like it just keeps getting more and more separate. But I feel like there is some stuff like this that kind of bundles stuff. Rails, I think, Laravel are good examples of kind of things that package it and, you know, bundle it together a little more.
A little bit tangentially, but do you know of anything to automatically-ish build admin pages and stuff off of your ORM models?
So
I'm kind of like
Prisma,
looking
let
to
me-
close the gap here between what something like Django offers and the tools you've been talking about.
Let me see. I don't play that much, but the ORM I'm using does have a thing where you can go in and kind of add records, see stuff, and kind of you know, explore your schemas in a UI, so to speak, without actually going straight to the database. It's still going through the ORM, still being validated by your application. I think that's probably like Next.js and Remix don't. They're less opinionated than I'd say. I'd say Django is probably one of the most opinionated frameworks in that sense, and that it actually has like so I've never played with it, but I understand it kind of has an admin built in for your models and stuff right off the bat, right? Like into building generators.
Yeah, it has an admin section. It lets you hook up method. You build models in your. You build methods in your ORM layer, and then you can trigger them, and that's kind of all exposed in your admin page. It's for getting things off the ground, it can be. You'll probably run into shortcomings that at some point maybe you'll want to someday throw it all out if you get big enough that it makes sense, but it kind of like does a good half your project.
Yeah, I'd say
from
the
the get-go.
closest thing if you is probably if you're using the ORM Prisma, has Prisma Studio, which I feel like this is kind of like it sort of looks like a spreadsheet, but it's actually your underlying like data models, and it still puts them through validation stuff like that. But you don't have to build any of it. It just kind of is all built from your schema.
Cool.
So what's the impact on things like deployment and things like concepts like progressive web apps? Because now you've got you're executing logic now on the server, kind of going back to the server rendering pages rather than just pushing out static code. Although most of the processing logic happens on the front end, you're just doing data transactions back and forth. Is that still
So-
it's kind of set up? Like I've used Next.js, like their static generation kind of stuff and all that. Not so much like deploying Nest to a server than server content.
Yeah, so Next does, if you're using kind of server-side rendering and you don't know all your pages up front, like generating them from the database, you'll need to do, you'll need like a full node server running, but like I personally have started using Google Cloud Run, which is like it's not quite function as a service unless you do a whole Docker container, but it runs just like there's no Kubernetes. I just set a minimum and a maximum instances. It takes care of scaling. But it's a full Node.js server or .NET or Java, Java Spring, whatever you want to do. But yeah, so you still need a full server if you want to do like a full application. But once you get past that first initial server-side rendering visit, it is all just data fetching. Now it's still it's hitting a real node server, which is then in turn going to a database and doing all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I still would say that a lot of logic and kind of fancy stuff can live on the front end.
Is it still possible to design the front end to be in support offline?
Yes, I mean I've never done much with PWAs, but I don't think there's anything at all that would kind of stop you from doing that.
We're just not starting to get in. So I'm starting to work on some Blazor projects. Not Bison, specifically Blazor server.
Yep.
That's something that I want people that come out is how do we support stuff like offline, those types of things.
Yeah, I mean like for next it would be
out in the field, so we'll make sure we can still service those requests.
yeah, and for next it would still be the same idea where you put in a service worker and you kind of cache your requests.
Right.
But I mean you're always going to have that limit of like as soon as you hit uncached requests, like it's just
Yeah.
whatever you decide to do in your service worker, returning some sort of known error, but you need to reconnect. But as far as like all the logic is there, that like you saw like recalculated in those properties, like that didn't need any API calls. Like when I'm dividing or referencing other properties that are on that page currently, that's all happening client side and it doesn't need any server side interaction. So it's a full on React app. Like it just gives you HTML on the first visit to make things feel snappy and fast, but it actually goes through the whole React rendering process when it hydrates, and it's just connecting event listeners and all that sort of stuff.
And what was it called? Remix? Was that the?
Remix is kind of the newer kid on the block, and
Yeah.
Next is it's still new, but it's got like a ton of traction. Like Walmart's using it for like their primary site. AT&T. I mean, pretty much it's sort of like the go-to for building big, enterprise-ready front ends. I would say. Also interesting though, I find it pretty friendly as like a solo dev hacking around on the side. It sort of does a nice straddling of like easy enough to work with for kind of a solo dev or just a hobby thing, but obviously scales up pretty massively to a Walmart.com or something like that.
I want to try Remix. It looks super fun. It's the same guys that built React Router.
Okay.
But like I feel like whenever I tried Next, I would always run into like I would start fighting it eventually.
I guess it depends what you're trying to do. I haven't run into too many issues
Which
with
I
it.
never hear that either. Yeah. So I'm feeling like I couldn't even tell you what to do.
Yeah, I have heard actually one of our forums somebody everything I do outgrows a static site generator pretty much right away, so I've never messed with that much. But somebody said it's a crappy static site generator.
Mm.
Like if you truly do want static, just use I guess Gatsby is
Gatsby.
the main one.
Yeah.
But like almost everything I do needs to talk like I don't know. I just feel like if you're doing something interesting, it's probably going to talk to a database or some APIs.
And that might be it too. A lot of what we were doing was like, okay, we need some static generation, but then like the build times just got incredible for like.
Yeah, and SWC as so Next hired the guy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with SWC, but it's a compiler for JavaScript written in Rust. So it's massively decreased build times.
Interesting.
But yeah, they SWC was like I said predates Rust. It was kind of just a hobby project of some guy, and started getting some traction, and then Vercel hired him and kind of
When did that start?
Next 12 was the first day, like, that's SWC is the default compiler.
And that was like just best.
Yeah, it was like just the end of last year, the beginning of this year, maybe a little later than that even. I'm not sure. And if you have a Babel config, it will fall back to the old Babel compiler. But that's another super interesting area. I feel like kind of going off the rails in the presentation, but I feel like Rust, ironically, like or C or C++, any sort of statically compiled language that doesn't need a garbage collector or its own runtime, seems like it's really kind of slotting in with TypeScript quite a bit. Like Rust, especially, is sort of I see it popping up all over. Sort of it's like Prisma, the ORM I'm using is actually written in Rust, and like Rust has pretty good bindings with Node, so it can sort of create JavaScript objects and read and write kind of that barrier. And because Rust because it doesn't need its own runtime and it can be fairly lightweight like a C or something like that, it actually runs in process. So it's not like it's still just one. It just looks like Node's running, but there is no other process, but it's technically like statically compiled Rust. Also, like any of this, again, it's Rust, C or C++, are excellent WASM targets, just because of, again, not needing to bring any runtime or garbage collection with them. They sort of, as WASM becomes a bigger and bigger thing on the web and Node and the web ecosystem, I feel like they're going to be excellent accompaniments.
The dinosaur said it's good.
Well,
I love
thank
these
you.
concepts. I'm like terrified because I like went all in on like .NET Core.
Oh no, .NET Core is gold, man. Don't be terrified.
And like, well, no. I'm terrified now to see how much it's changed in the 2 years that I've been doing pretty much only .NET development. And it's like, look at all these terms and they're like all these technologies. And it's like I've never even heard of.
So is that
And I thought I was like a hot loaded React developer, like 2019, 2020. And I was like,
I've been mobile development for the past 3 years, so I'm completely qualified.
Yeah, what do you do?
iOS mobile development.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So is that where some of the excitement interest comes from? It's just keeping up with technology?
Yeah, the web's super interesting in that, like JavaScript and the standards evolve super slow, just because like there's so many bodies involved and like they literally almost never break backwards compatibility. So something you wrote will always kind of run in a new version of Chrome. The reverse is true, but like
Well, did Steve Jobs prevent JavaScript from running on their systems? Or is that something else that he prevented?
no, so in iOS, and I think Android actually, it's not just iOS, but you can't, so JavaScript is kind of faster than it ever should be. Like it just, V8 does so much amazing work, but it's all JIT, it's all just-in-time compilation, and you can't ship a JIT in an iOS app. So like if you want to use Android, React Native or anything like that, even some of the .NET stuff that isn't AOT isn't JITted, so it just like all feels kind of slow.
My understanding was the Jobs said he wouldn't allow JavaScript or Java to run on these systems. So
Oh, you're thinking of Java, the big Java. Yeah, I think you might be.
I'm sorry, I didn't know the exact.
Oh yeah, you're thinking of when he. So macOS used to include the Java VM by default with macOS, and I think that was well, one, it was never included in iOS, and even as a couple macOS versions ago.
I got the impression it was performance oriented. He wasn't happy with the performance, so that's why he said.
I mean, he also probably didn't like Oracle or.
Apple doesn't seem to like, because they're pulling Python too
Yeah.
from their system, and they don't seem to like just-in-time compiling
Okay,
languages.
thanks.
Part of the Java thing was, for the longest time, the Java license would only allow you to run it on a phone if you ran Java ME.
Okay.
And then for a long time after that, I don't know that they changed the license, but there were ongoing lawsuits relating to Google having decided to ship desktop-style Java on a device. So I'm sure that had something to do with Apple wanting to make sure that Java stayed far away from their devices, at least for a good long time.
I mean, Apple also likes when you write for their platform, because I mean, it's kind of a vendor lock-in. Like if you write with a Java, like I mean, that was the original write once, run anywhere, language. So I mean, their bread and butter is sort of. I feel like with iOS, most major apps are still on iOS like 12 months or longer before the Android version drops. Like Mac OS probably is at its lowest point ever, but for the longest time had like a bunch of like BBEdit, TextMate. I feel like was kind of like the OG like VS Code like way before a lot of that stuff used to be kind of Mac only apps, you know, written in Objective C and whatever the old kind of Mac OS APIs were. So I feel like they had some interest, and I mean, also you still could. It was just a click away to get Java back like on your Mac.
Yeah.
One thing that's bugged me for a long time about JavaScript on iOS is they do have a JIT, but if you want to include their JavaScript engine in your application, not like even like a local version of it, but like just use its API,
Yeah.
that one's not JITted. So the JITted one only is for Safari.
Yeah, Safari. Yeah, Safari. If you use what is their? I don't even know what their JavaScript core, whatever. Yeah, JavaScript core in Safari has the JIT turned on, but if you bundle it in an app, it's no JIT. The same with V8. If you bundle like React Native now bundles V8, but it's in a kind of interpret only.
Yeah. Well, that one makes a touch more sense.
I
Yeah.
don't. Josh is the one recording.
Yeah, we can turn that off.
I just, you know, I have some questions, but I didn't want to be part of it.
Well, then, thank you.